Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Meet Menaca Talk Show, episode 25. Our speaker today is Krish Nath. He is a familiar speaker on our platform. He is a fellow BABCP consultant practitioner, clinical supervisor, chairperson of Standard and Ethics Committee of BABCP. Today, he is here to speak about dealing with discrimination. And I have a feeling we are going to hear something what he has never spoken before. Thank you so much, Krish, for being a speaker on this platform again. As I know, you are an expert in psychology and chairman of Ethics Standard Committee of Psychotherapists. So I'm a bit puzzled. What got you interested in discrimination? This is a very different topic. Over to you, Krish.
Well, I think that discrimination is something that is part of our lives, all our lives. We make lots of decisions in everyday living in a discriminating way. However, what we're talking about here is not just discrimination. Discrimination, as by definition, is okay in everyday living. What's not okay is unfair discrimination. Yes?
Sure.
And there is a thing called unfair discrimination that's based on certain stereotypes, certain attitudes that people develop in several different ways. Yes, racism being one of them. And to understand racism, we need to look at history. We need to understand where it's come from and how it's been maintained. We need to understand the power constructs that are at play that helps to maintain the position of power of one group of people over another, usually a smaller group. And this unfairness tends to be a transgression of the basic human rights that every single one of us who occupy a few inches of space on Earth has a right to. We have a right to be heard, we have a right to an opinion, we have a right to free speech, we have a right to equal opportunities. You know, life has lots of limits as we go along. And sometimes we have to take into consideration those limits, where the boundaries are, you know. So for example, very quickly, you know, if we take the United Kingdom, for instance, you know, 80% of the people are European whites. They were the original sort of occupants, if you like, of this land.
Caucasian, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, you will expect public services, infrastructure that's developed will be developed in favor to serve them rather than a minority 10% of other ethnic groups who are immigrants. What you wouldn't expect is that having been accepted to come here, whether you're a visitor, whether you're a national, you would not expect to have your basic human rights transgressed. That is a denial of your true identity. And if you cannot uphold your true identity, then you have an awful lot of problems. So, and the reason why I have become interested in this subject, well, I've actually experienced, since coming to England, there were two major cases. One I didn't follow up, and the second one I did. And that's basically, this is something that I've never talked about in a public way, and there were lots of reasons for that. One is I was barred from talking about it for a period of, I think, 15 years. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to sort of looking at the number of complaints, looking at what's going on, have been going on recently across the ocean in the United States with the Black Lives movements and so on. There are things, you've seen how statues were pulled down in England, you know, and there was a time when those statues were useful. They were not really fit for purpose in the 21st century, however. Yes, and you know, the reasons for that, for what I'm saying here, is very clear. It's so clear that those statues came down in very disturbing circumstances, but yet the powers to be did very little to stop it. So in other words, they were agreeing that, you know, the life of those statues in public places were long overdue. Yes? Yes. So I thought that the number of cases that I hear about, even by today's standards, it would be good, since we talk about mental health, since we talk about, you know, the difficulties faced by certain groups of certain ethnic groups, like the Tamil refugees and so on, and people from the Caribbean and other parts of the world who come here. A lot of these people face very similar problems. They are denied certain access. Sometimes they're faced with a lot of coercion in getting them to comply. And I thought that it would be good if I can not only demonstrate, but say, you know, what happened to me and how I actually managed it. Yes, because I think one of the biggest put-offs from people doing what is right and following things through is their own fear that, you know, sometimes people think, well, I might not be able to get justice here. I might not be able to stand up to these people. They're much more powerful than me. Some people feel quite deflated sometimes because of their own sort of inabilities to be articulate with linguistics, with language, yes, in explaining things. And sometimes people don't know how to go about managing and organizing themselves to prepare for dealing with these cases, yes? So hence the reason why I became interested. I took them on, and my discrimination was about 30 years ago. It was a very, very high level of operation in health service practice. I was not coerced, but I was advised initially not to do it. And I listened to everyone, but at the end of the day, I had to go away and make my own decision. And my decision was to take on the system. So hence, you know, what I learned in that whole process, it took 4 years to get where I needed to get to. What I learned in those 4 years, you can't read in any textbook. You can't read in any law. And that learning actually made a much better person out of me, actually. For a lot of people, might be considered as a very dark period of time. 4 years is a long time. When I look back on it, and at the time as well, I never once thought of it as this is a dark moment in my life. Yes, and I will explain some of that as we go along. But hence, that's the reason why I'm interested in it, because I started generalizing what I learned, onto lots of other areas of discrimination, of unequal opportunities, things like gender issues, sexual discrimination, and so on. So that's a reason.
Sure. Thank you, Krish. I think, thank you for pointing out this is not the only discrimination which exists. As you said, across the pond, of course, Black Lives Matter is there, but there are other races, other genders, and because of sexual orientation, language, religion, race, it is quite widespread. We will come to that later. But can you please enlighten us? How did you manage that situation? And more importantly, as you rightly pointed out, these are difficult times, challenging times for most people. And so how did you manage yourself as well over that period of time? Because 4 years seems a very long time in someone's life.
I made a little bit of notes just to give you a bit of, I think it's important for you to understand and follow it. You need to understand a little bit of the preamble to the whole thing. I joined Eastbourne Health Authority, which in those days, the whole provision of healthcare was differently organized. I'm talking about the Maggie Thatcher era. And it was the time when internal competition was introduced in the health service. A whole new approach to managing health was introduced. And for the first time, we had people like general managers in the health service. I was appointed from London to Eastbourne in June 1986 as a team leader for a group of psychological therapists. And they were actually 4. I did very, very, very quickly. I did a lot of developmental work there, things that are still being done now. If you go to Eastbourne, you will see that therapy is actually based at the GP surgery, psychological therapies. And at the time that was introduced, I was the person who introduced that. I did the entire development of something like about 50 GP practices. Those were the days when, everything in mental health used to be done at the hospital, even outpatients. GPs didn't allow anyone else to go and practice at their surgeries. So a colored person coming into Eastbourne, East Sussex, at that time, 30 years ago, you're probably walking down the street. You'll be lucky if you see a colored person every day. Yes, there were just a handful of people in Eastbourne who were of a different color. So me going and telling a whole load of white GPs what my plan for development was, even people like my bosses thought it was going to be a very difficult task. However, within 6 months, the whole thing was established. And taking off from there were other developments which was well before time that I introduced in Eastbourne. But in 1988, I was approached by the district director of HR. And this is one of the top people for the region. So this is somebody operating at a very high level. And he approached me with a view to the development of a postgraduate full-time 18 months program for training therapists who would be based at Brighton University. Brighton University at that was one of the new John Major's conversion from polytechnics to university. And we had a meeting, we talked about it. It was seen as a major financial income generating scheme, because these courses were very, very expensive. There were only 4 in the whole country at that time. And so I went along with the idea. I thought it was a good idea. It was good for me. And they asked me if I will spearhead the curriculum development with guidance from a more senior educationalist. So we had meetings and the course was developed. A year later, when we were sort of at the point where we are doing course accreditation and all of that, I had a phone call one evening telling me that from the director of education, and the basis of the conversation was, Krish, you will need to resign your current position as a team leader and supervisor, because if you're coming across to lead the course, then you will need to undergo the postgraduate diploma in education, which is a full-time one-year course, university-based. And it means somebody will be needed to do your job. So we have to relieve you of that position. So I listened and I thought it made sense at the time, and I resigned. I sent in my resignation, but I was very careful to write that I was only submitting this resignation because I was informed this was necessary under the current developments. And that point was borne out in my resignation letter. And I didn't suspect at that point anything untoward was happening. The first time that I got wind of something, I felt a bit uncomfortable, was when I got acceptance onto the University of Surrey full-time education course. And I approached the same director of education who had the budget for the training budget. And he said to me, there's a problem, Christian. I said, what's that? He said, well, the budget has been exhausted because we've just sponsored a couple of other people. And I said, so what do I do now? I said, I can't continue to develop a course here without a position. And he said to me, he said, okay, he said, I'll have to meet with the chief executive and discuss this issue. In the meanwhile, my junior colleague called me on the telephone and he sounded nervous. And he said, Krish, I just had a call from such and such a person, and they're telling me that they want me they're sponsoring me to go and do the postgraduate certificate in education. And they mentioned the course that they might want 2 people in the course to do the training on the course. And I wasn't made aware of this, but he said, I'm feeling very uncomfortable about it because you told me the other day that they told you they didn't have a budget for training you, for sending you on the education course. And now they're telling me that they want me to go and do it. And I said, well, I'll raise the question, which I did. And the answer came back the same. So that was the first inkling. I thought there was something not right. And from that moment, from that moment in particular, I became very cautious and I was very meticulous in making sure that I documented every single bloody conversation. My professional body, I was speaking to someone there and they asked me to go and see someone in London. And I went to see this person in London who was from the national board. And they said to me immediately, I didn't have to actually complete an application form. They said, if you have been accepted at Surrey, we will fund it fully. This was a government health department. So off I went, and I was doing the course. I was coming back from the course, and I was also doing bits and pieces of work towards the development of the new course. As we were approaching the end of the program at the end of a year, I had another phone call, this time from the district director of HR, who said to me that you're being invited to an interview next week. About half an hour after that conversation, my junior colleague, who was having difficulty getting on an education program, called me, and he said, "Krish, do you realize what's going on here?" I said, "Well, I think I do, but enlighten me." He said, "Well, I just had a phone call, and they're telling me that they want to interview me for the post." He said, "And I really don't know what to do." I said, "Well, you have to do what you believe is the right thing to do for you." I said, "Because if you don't attend the interview," I said, "and if I can make the assumption that for some reason they do not want me to be that person, they will just go and find somebody else." So, and that confirmed to me then that something really awful was happening. Now, the people that I was working with in developing this course, I spent a lot of time, if someone had come and said to me, "Krish, these people are such and such," I would have said no. These are people I was having the odd beer with in discussing issues, sometimes having lunch with them, working lunch with them in the process. So we got to know each other quite well. The first thing I did was I alerted my professional body to what was happening. And I told them, I have it in writing, that I was asked to develop this thing with a view to leading it. There is something happening, there's an undercurrent here, which I cannot justify yet, but I'm going to an interview, and I will guarantee you, at the end of that, I can't see that I am going to be offered this post. It just happens as we were coming up at university towards the end of the education program. We had a half day when, it was a general discussion. And this was the beginning. You asked the question, managing, yes? Mm-hmm. We had a half day towards the end of the program just for discussion. It was free. It was called free discussion, I think. And the group of students were meant to come up with an agenda of what they want to discuss. And I boldly put my hand up, and I explained to them that I have an interview. I didn't mention anything else. I just said I have an interview next week, and it will be really good if I can come with some questions, because things like curriculum development, assessment strategies, examination strategies, marking, and all these sorts of things, I'd never really had much experience in that. And the next week, I laid out my questions. I took 12 questions with me. And a whole half day with a group of about 15 students plus the senior lecturer were going through these questions bit by bit, and I was busy writing down almost everything that was said. Yes, I anticipated questions that were going to be asked. When I went to the interview, my interview lasted an hour and a quarter. I was asked 13 or 14 questions. I answered all of them as I can recall. My junior colleague went next, and there were only the two of us, so this post was not advertised. Yes? My junior colleague went in, 45 minutes on the dot, he was out. And I said, when we came out, we chatted, and I said, "How did you find it?" He said, "Well, there wasn't much to it." I said, "How many questions did they ask you?" He said, 7. And I said, "Okay." Now, I think about 3 days after, the district director personnel came to me, and I knew what the answer was going to be. But as soon as he started talking, he started coughing. And I looked at him and smiled. And he said, Krish, one of the things about communication, I want to talk to you about communication. You know, in the last World War, the Japanese, prior to their invasion of Pearl Harbor, the Americans had all the information, and I didn't let him go further. I think I said to him, I said, Richard, let's cut the bullshit here. I said, what is it you want to tell me? Because that Open University course you're talking about, program, I watched it also. So I know about the Japanese, the misinterpretation of communications and all of that. I said, what is it you called me here for today? He said, well, it's to say that I'm sorry that we've offered the job to my colleague. So I said, well, just say it. Why are you telling me about communications in World War II? And that was the end of that. That was the end of that meeting. I got up, I said, I don't think we need to discuss anything any further. And he said to me, what are you going to do? I said, well, right now, that is my problem, isn't it? That is not your problem. I said, but you will hear from me again. And I left. Now, my professional body had said to me very carefully, Krish, you have to go to that interview, even though you think that they're going to offer it to somebody else because none of it makes sense. Mm-hmm. You have to go, because that's the only time we know for sure that discrimination has taken place. So immediately, this person was ready, and he came to meet me the very evening. And he said, okay, this is what we have to do. So the first thing is we have to use the grievance procedure. And any one of you who knows something about health service management, there's a whole series of stages of the grievance procedure. Well, this one was taking place at the second to last level. That was the, So after that, the only alternative was you can appeal to the chief executive. We went through the motions. This was now, we're into 1990. During the appeals hearing, the district director of human resource, he made the mistake of, and I don't know that it was a mistake, he tape recorded a whole session without informing us that it was going to be recorded, without giving us any information at all. And it was purely by accident that the person who was representing me noticed the microphone. Are you tape recording this meeting? And he said very sheepishly, well, yes, shouldn't you have informed us about this before? Well, I should have had a secretary, but I couldn't get a secretary today. Anyway, so we add that to the list of grievances. Now, we went through the grievance process. He got his hand smacked at the end of that process by the chief executive. But when the final thing was done, they concluded that there was no discrimination. So we then had to go to the employment tribunal. And this is going into 1991 now. We had 4 days hearing at the employment tribunal. Very, very harrowing sort of experience. And when I walked in there the first day, I looked at these 3 judges, all white middle class, and I thought to myself, this is going to be some place to get justice for a race discrimination case. And my representative looked at me as I came in. I was just looking at these 3 characters sitting behind this long table in the courtroom. And he said, listen, whatever happens here is not the end. He said, I am not expecting that they are going to come out with a judgment of unfair discrimination in your favor. He said, we will have to get justice, we will have to go to an independent court. And the only place that can be is the High Court. Mm-hmm. But we have to do all of this. So we went through that process. I was interrogated by their barrister, by the judges. I answered them. In the meanwhile, I had applied. Surrey University, that was when they wanted a senior lecturer, and I had applied. I went with 5 other candidates there, and I was offered a job. So we went through the tribunal. I had commenced my job at University of Surrey. I also had a scholarship to Eastern Europe at the fall of the Berlin Wall. Most of you will remember that, in 1990. And I did a lot of public speaking on that tour. It was a 3-month in the Czech Republic. And one of the things that came out of that, the university gave me all 3 months. I had just started working for them, but when they heard that I got the scholarship, they said, go. Was that they asked me, the Czech people asked me if I will come and help them to introduce a postgraduate program in psychotherapy. I came back, I brought this to the university, and they agreed that it's something they want to be involved with. Now, as things happened in the 4 days at the tribunal, meanwhile, when that came to an end, it was as we expected. Then we had to go and see a barrister in London who had to make the application to the High Court. I spent a whole afternoon with this gentleman, and he took one look at my file and he said to me, you could have been a lawyer. I said, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm trying to do my best in education. He looked through it and he told me straight away, we will win this case. He said, so from now on, get on with work, get on with life, leave the rest to me.
Thank you so much for giving an insight. I just want to know what was the outcome of it. So I'm going to ask you other questions which can enlighten people of what they can do.
Sure. The High Court proceedings took place in 1993 or 4. What the High Court does is the High Court looks at the evidence submitted with the barristers. I was asked to attend, and it took the High Court 40 minutes to come to a decision, and they told the barrister of the health authority, this case must go back to the tribunal, and the tribunal must find in Mr. Nath's favor. My barrister stretched out his hand for me to shake it, and he said, that's what we want. He said, you've won it. Whatever happens now, the employment tribunal cannot fail to find in your favor. But the health authority used that opportunity of going back to the tribunal to still try to make comments and defamatory remarks. I don't know to try and do what. There was a point where my barrister at that particular proceeding said to me, Krish, you don't have to sit and listen to this nonsense. Go and have a sandwich, go and have a break. They will come to me to settle this case. And when they do, you need to be here because you need to tell me what to do.
I take it was in your favor.
It was in my favor, yes. But again, just for people who, I hope you don't have to come up to things like this, but if you do, when all the rubbishing is finished, to say then that was all done to protect the image of the health authority and the image of the person who was the main antagonist. About 20 minutes before, I was called and they said, we want to settle. Yes, so they didn't wait for the employment tribunal to pass a judgment. They went and said to the other barrister, we want to settle this out of court now. When it's settled out of court, what that means is they're avoiding elements of the newspaper. They can put a tap on me because they're offering me money. They're offering me a settlement. And that was done.
Thank you. I know you experienced racial discrimination. However, as we already pointed out, there are other sorts of discrimination because of gender, religion, language, sexual orientation, age. It's a myriad of different things. Can you tell our audience what is one learning, what you learned from this experience? Also, what kind of advice you would give? But I want you to bear in mind, I know we are in the United Kingdom. I'm not making your experience any easier at all, but there are parts of the world, this procedure perhaps is not possible even. There's not even the possibility of fighting it out like you did and coming out on the other side. So bearing all that in mind, what would you advise them, or how would you ask them to manage the situation, please?
I can answer that very quickly. Any form of oppression, it's designed to cause tremendous fear and to acknowledge who is superior in terms of power. So as I said earlier, it goes at the heart of someone's identity. And if you don't know who the hell you are, then how can you possibly make any decisions about what you want to be? You can't, right? So when you come down to things like sexual discrimination, which has been happening for a long time, when you talk about cultural differences, things like religious discrimination, in this country, going back to the 70s and 80s, we had fighting amongst the Christians, the Catholics versus the Church of England. You go to India, yes, and you see fighting was there last year between a group of Hindus and a village of Muslims. Look what's happened in the Middle East. All of these forms of oppression is about dominance. It is about, one group not just trying to maintain power. I mean, if you're a larger group, often you know very well that you're maintaining power, but it's about showing power. Discrimination takes the form of humiliation. There's a thing called microaggression these days. And it can come in the form of, in a very subtle way, things that people do. People make jokes about another group. People make strange, odd comments. I remember only recently writing a paper to the BABCP board asking them to support the Black Lives Movement, but also in the form of trying to remove the issue of color from the discussion. Because do we need to refer to anybody as black? Do we need to refer to anybody as brown or white? I've never seen a black person who is actually black. They're just a darker shade of brown. I've never seen a white person who is actually white. Have you? Milk is white. This sheet of paper here is white. Okay? I've never seen a white person looking like this. They may be a shade of white, right? Most of the times they're a shade of brown. The Chinese, who we refer to as the yellow race, do you ever hear anybody walking down the street calling out for a yellow man? But you hear people walking down the streets shouting out about a black man and a white man. And somebody asked me the question the other day, why Africans often use the word nigger amongst themselves. And yes, they're allowed to do that. That is their right. Amongst themselves, they can call each other whatever they like, because malice isn't intended. When the word is used by another race, malice is intended. Humiliation is intended. And even on the cricket field, in a recent test match in Australia, one of the Indian test cricketers were making noises of a monkey when an Australian player of mixed race came in to bat. He was suspended for quite a few games as a result. Yes, because it was deemed a racist motive. The case of gender issue, we know how long have women been fighting for equal pay. One of our largest organizations, the BBC, they have been in the news only last year about their reluctance to award the same pay to women doing similar jobs to their male counterparts. Do you really think in the 21st century we should be having that discussion? So that would be my answer to your question.
Thank you so much, Krish. And I think microaggression is something, I think it is something to be addressed, I think. And also there are cultural variations in certain cultures. Coming to the next week's topic, actually, being single parenting or, being single. And we spoke about how we overcome stigma of mental health issues. Even health has become an issue where it can be discriminated. So, thank you so much, Krish, for that, because I think this is a subject which will need some light shed on it for sure. And slowly but surely, more and more people are talking about it openly. And I'm glad that we could talk in a way that it's not only focusing on one particular discrimination, rather just widely. Thank you so much for pointing out the gender discrimination and the religious discrimination and how widely it is prevalent in our societies and across the globe. So thanks for that. I am aware that we are very close to the closing time, so I'm just going to extend a few questions, but please be on the platform for people who are in the Zoom. You are going to be able to ask as many questions you want within a reasonable time. Thank you so much for that enlightening talk. Before I go into asking some of the questions, I am going to introduce the next speaker and the topic. Next time, another topic which is really close to my heart. It is about single parenting, and it's no secret. I am a single parent myself, and I definitely know the pains of it. And I know that there are few of us in this platform who are single parents, and we will be looking forward to listening to what Shera Ottman has to say about the single parenting bit. And she is a lawyer by qualification. She's into communication and PR and legal services, and she's an artist by passion. She will be speaking about surviving single parenting next week, same time, same place, on Saturdays at 3 p.m. UK time. Please prepare the questions to ask Krish. People who are on Facebook, please do feel free to join us. We are admitting people into the Zoom if you want to ask a question straight to Krish. As you are preparing for the questions, I'm going to ask Kirubay to come and give the vote of thanks. Over to you, Kirubay.
Thank you, Menaca. We'd like to give our appreciation to Krish, a very insightful sharing, Krish, and we thank you. And Krish, you're an epitome of knowledge. You always bring a different field to a topic. You are very reliable, and we love you for that. You're iconic in your own way, sincere and humorous, always putting us to have a banter on WhatsApp. And I love that, Krish. And Krish, you have been a great friend to Meet Menaca and the team. We thank you, we bless you, and we keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, for sure, Krish has become a good friend over time. And if you know him a bit longer, you would know the humorous side of him coming through for sure, like Kirubay mentioned. So thank you so much for that. The first question to you is from one of the audiences, anonymously. So the question says, I have been trying to get an employment for the past 15 years. I suffer from mental health issues. I'm just wondering, could that be an element of discrimination in it that I am not finding a job? Over to you, Krish.
There could be an element of discrimination, but I don't know that I can say it's an unfair discrimination, because if you have a mental health problem, then it depends on lots of things. It depends on the applications you've made, the nature of the job that you've applied for, and what you have disclosed, mental health, and the level at which you're able to function. Now, coming from the field of mental health, I can inform you that, there is help available for people who have suffered from any form of severe mental health problems and want to get into the labor market. One of the developments, and this has been going on for some time now, from an institutional point, is that, many companies, including the public services, have been set targets in terms of the number of people they must have on their staff coming from a mental illness position. And so my guidance would be, if you're unsuccessful, you can ask for feedback, first of all. Yes, because we can't say why they're rejecting you. But then I would suggest that you go through a lot of the schemes to help people with disabilities on the whole is now coordinated through the job centers. And that should be your first port of call. There are lots of charities that offer work for people who have been laid off, who haven't been to work for some considerable time, just to get them back into the speed of work. And they have sort of counselors, coaches who are there to sort of guide you through the process.
Sure.
And will bring you up to speed with things like filling out a CV, getting you to think about what sort of work you're cut out for, or have you been applying for the right jobs, to suit your skill level and even your personality. So, and those systems are actually in place. And a lot of people, if you go to places like the supermarkets, you can see a graduate these days sitting at the shop till, and you can also see people with varying disabilities at other tills. Of course, with a disability, you have to be able, in some way, to perform the job for which you apply. So further guidance, I would say, before we jump to discrimination, sort of need to be considered here.
Thank you so much, Krish. For people who are watching on the Facebook, we have passed our time. So apologies for being slightly delayed. We will see you next week, same time, same place, to be addressing single parenting. Hope you can join us. Until then, be safe, be happy, and keep smiling.